He boarded quietly, a 15-year-old robotics prodigy, headed to the biggest competition of his life, wearing a school hoodie, holding a boarding pass, sitting in the right seat. He had done everything right. But that didn't stop the flight attendant from watching him, whispering, calling security, and before the wheels even lifted off the ground, he was asked to leave. Why? Because of a cup of water, because of a glance, or because, to some people, a quiet black teenager with a backpack is reason enough. What happens when the world sees your son as a threat, even when he's done nothing at all, and what changes? When his father shows up in full police uniform, this story will stay with you, not just because of the injustice, but because of the way a boy refused to disappear. Turn up your volume. Let us know what you think in the comments. Like the video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge what we think we know. Let's begin. Isaiah Brooks sat alone at Gate B32 in Newark Liberty International Airport, his backpack hugged close to his chest. His name had just been called over the intercom. Boarding Group 3, Flight 803 to Denver, business class, row 6, seat A. He knew it by heart. He checked it 12 times already on his phone, on the boarding pass, in the confirmation email his teacher printed for him in case of signal loss. Still, he checked again. A family of 4 brushed past him, the smallest child dragging a glittery suitcase shaped like a unicorn. A man in a sports jacket stood near the window, speaking loudly into his phone, arguing about stock prices. The boarding gate buzzed with small chaos, but Isaiah stayed silent, a still point in the blur. This was his first time flying alone. Not just alone, but for something that mattered. The National Student Engineering Expo in Denver. Robotics Division. His school, North Bay Tech Academy, had nominated him after he'd won the regional qualifiers with his design for an autonomous soil sensor bot. He had named it Terra Pulse. The school paid for the flight. His coach printed the itinerary. His principal gave him a laminated emergency card. And his mother, Naomi Brooks, had driven him to the terminal that morning with calm eyes and a voice full of quiet weight. Stay composed. Let your work speak louder than the noise. She had said it like a blessing, but Isaiah heard the warning inside it too. He always did. At 15, Isaiah was already used to feeling the room shift when he entered, sometimes subtle, sometimes not. His height, his skin, the fact that he spoke carefully and rarely smiled when he didn't mean it, those things shaped how people interpreted him before he even said a word. But still, he followed every rule, just like his mom taught him. Button-down shirt, neat shoes, ID card in the front pocket, and nothing in his bag but project notes, a laptop, and a carefully wrapped towel holding the small robot in its casing. He stood when Group 3 was called, adjusting the single strap of his bag over his shoulder, and stepped forward. The line moved slowly down the jet bridge. The hum of the plane's auxiliary engine rumbled faintly through the walls as Isaiah stepped aboard Flight 803. The smell hit him first lemon cleaner and coffee that had been reheated one too many times. He smiled faintly, not because he was excited, but because it grounded him. He counted rows as he moved down the aisle, one hand on the seat backs, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. His seat, window side, row 6A. He reached up to place his backpack in the overhead bin when he heard the voice. "Excuse me, young man." A woman stood beside him, blonde hair tucked into a tight bun, name tag glinting under the cabin lights. Hannah Trask, flight attendant. Her tone was light, almost musical, but just underneath it, something stiff lingered. "Are you sure this is your assigned seat?" "Sweetheart, Isaiah froze, then reached into his chest pocket, pulled out the boarding pass, and handed it to her. His fingers trembled slightly. He hoped she wouldn't notice. She took it, glanced down, then up at him again. A pause too long. All right. She handed it back without apology. No smile. Just turned and walked away. Isaiah sat down, carefully, quietly, his heart tapping out a rhythm faster than it should have. He buckled his seatbelt and stared straight ahead. The seat beside him remained empty. The aisle filled with new passengers. Overhead bins slammed shut. A baby cried somewhere further back. The sound should have calmed him, the noise of normalcy, but it didn't, not fully. He looked out the window, watching a baggage cart roll by. One of the handlers in a neon vest waving absently at the cockpit window. Isaiah's chest was tight, and he didn't know why. Or maybe he did. He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and read the message his mom had sent right after hugging him goodbye that morning. Naomi Brooks, trust yourself. The world may try not to, but you must. Love you. He didn't respond right away. He just read it again and again. The man in 6B arrived moments later, middle-aged, salt and pepper beard, crisp business blazer. He glanced at Isaiah, offered a polite nod, and settled in with minimal fuss. No conversation, no questions, just distance. Isaiah didn't mind. He didn't want to talk. He opened his laptop and clicked into the PowerPoint file. Terra Pulse, a responsive agriculture bot for soil health. His design slides were perfect, color-coded, logical, clear, but the words felt far away. His fingers hovered over the trackpad. He couldn't focus. Instead, he kept thinking about the way Hannah had looked at him. The pause, the tone, as if his presence was unexpected. Not wrong, exactly, but out of place. He shook it off, or tried to. He wasn't here to feel things. He was here to win. Isaiah Brooks didn't notice the moment the cabin door closed. He was too focused on his screen, though the words blurred. His hands sat still on the laptop's keyboard, unmoving. He knew he should rehearse his intro slide just once more, but his stomach twisted instead. The metal around him hummed, alive with pre-takeoff energy. Tray tables clicked, bags shifted, shoes shuffled against the floor. Across the aisle, a woman in a soft gray sweater carefully unpacked her eye mask and tucked it into the seat pocket, then wrapped a silk scarf around her neck. She didn't look at Isaiah. No one really did, except Hannah Trask. The flight attendant walked by again, this time slower. Her eyes lingered on Isaiah's laptop screen, as if reading his slides. Her voice, moments later, floated just above a whisper to the woman in 6C. If anything makes you uncomfortable, just let me know. Isaiah heard it. He was meant to. He glanced sideways. The woman didn't reply, only gave a small nod and adjusted her purse. He tried to return to his work. His presentation wasn't complicated. It was clean, visual, easy to explain. The robot used ultrasonic pulses to detect motion and analyze soil texture, perfect for low-cost agricultural development. He'd spent 3 months building it, 2 months debugging it, and the past 2 weeks dreaming about what it might feel like to win something national. But right now, all he felt was watched. Isaiah minimized the window and closed the laptop slowly. He needed something else, music maybe, but the noise in his head was already too loud. He looked down. His hands were shaking slightly. He rubbed them together. Moments later, Hannah approached again. She was pushing a service cart this time, cheerful now. her smile wide as she leaned toward the man in 6B. "Would you care for a glass of white wine, sir, or maybe sparkling water?" Lewis chuckled at something she said. She laughed back. "Light? Comfortable? Water is fine. Thank you," said the woman in 6C. And for you, Hannah turned to Isaiah. Her smile faded slightly. Still there, but less curved. Less honest. "Water, please," Isaiah said calmly. She didn't move. She just looked at him for a beat too long. "ID," she asked. "Sorry. Your identification. I need to verify your age." Isaiah blinked. He looked over at Mr. Lewis, who was sipping wine. The woman by the window, already mid-sip. Neither had been asked for ID. "It's just water." "Yes," Hannah said, still smiling. "Company policy. We're tightening regulations for unaccompanied minors." He fumbled for his wallet and pulled out his school ID. She barely glanced at it before handing it back. When she set the cup of water on his tray table, she did it with such force that it nearly slid. A small droplet from the lid ran down the side. She turned without another word. Isaiah stared at the cup. He didn't drink it. He couldn't. Something about the moment felt less like service, more like a signal that said, "You don't belong here. We're watching." His phone vibrated in his hoodie pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. "Mom, you in the air yet?" He tapped back slowly. "Boarded? Not yet." He paused, then added, "Weird vibes, though. Nothing big." But the tightness in his chest didn't ease. Hannah was now at the front again. Whispering to another flight attendant, Brent Connors, a man in his early 30s with tired eyes and a neat beard, Isaiah saw her glance in his direction. Brent followed her gaze, nodded, and picked up a small electronic tablet. He typed something in. Isaiah's stomach dropped. Was it something I did? Was it the hoodie? Was it how I walked in? The plane hadn't even left the ground. He'd spoken to no one but Hannah. He'd handed her ID. He'd followed instructions. Sat down where he was supposed to. Didn't even recline the seat. But still, he could feel something building. Not loud. Not yet. But brewing. Isaiah turned his face toward the window, seeing only his own reflection. The boarding process was nearly complete. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, the signal for departure prep. He pressed his knees together and folded his hands neatly on his lap. "Keep composed," he whispered. "Just ride this out." But the air felt thinner now, and the water on his tray looked untouched for a reason. The cabin dimmed to a soft orange glow, the kind that signaled quiet, quiet before takeoff, quiet before questioning. But for Isaiah Brooks, it wasn't quiet at all. It was loud inside, a buzzing beneath his skin, the kind of noise you can't hear, only feel. Hannah Trask hadn't returned to his row since dropping the water, but Isaiah could still sense her. Or rather, he sensed the space she left behind. That careful, cautious air. The last few passengers filed on. A toddler let out a wail 2 rows back, and someone grumbled about overhead bin space. But most eyes stayed forward. No one noticed the boy in 6A with his hands clenched beneath the tray table. Or maybe they noticed and chose not to. At the front of the plane, Brent Connors was still typing something into his crew tablet. Hannah leaned in again, her voice too low to hear but her gestures sharp. Another glance toward Isaiah. He didn't miss it. They weren't subtle anymore. He didn't understand what was happening, but he felt what it was becoming. He shifted in his seat, then stopped. Even that felt like too much. If I stand, will they say I'm being erratic? If I ask a question, will they call it aggressive? That's the thing no one tells you about flying while black. There's a way your body must learn to take up less space, to shrink, to smile just enough, but not too much, to speak clearly, but not often, to follow rules that change mid-sentence. The intercom crackled. The captain's voice came through, calm and distant. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be pushing back from the gate in just a few minutes. Flight time to Denver is 4 hours, 15 minutes. Passengers stirred, but Isaiah stayed frozen. His water still untouched, his ID back in his pocket, his mind racing. Why is she talking about me? What did I do? He thought of his mom's voice again. Sometimes the story they tell about you starts before you speak. That's why we stay ready. Then it happened. Hannah's radio buzzed softly at her hip. She lifted the earpiece to her ear, nodded, and walked back toward row 6. She wasn't holding anything this time. No drinks, no tray, just her voice. "Excuse me, Isaiah. Could I speak to you for a moment?" Her tone was soft, but practiced, the kind used in hospital waiting rooms or when denying entry without explanation. He blinked. "What for?" "Just a quick check." "A routine verification," she said, crouching slightly in the aisle so she could be level with him. "It won't take more than a minute." The man next to Isaiah shifted his legs. The woman in 6C leaned subtly away. Eyes now flicked toward him. The same passengers who'd ignored him suddenly seemed interested. Isaiah's seatbelt felt like a tether. He hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even asked for anything. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice steady but quieter than he meant. "Not necessarily," Hannah replied. "We've just had some concerns from the front." She smiled. The kind of smile that isn't kindness. The kind that cloaks something sharper. Isaiah's chest tightened. His eyes darted to the front of the plane. Brent was watching. Another crew member hovered near the curtain. The weight of all the stares settled on him. He thought about texting his mom, about standing, about following her, about refusing. But mostly, he just sat there, feeling small, feeling like no one in this cabin would stop what was happening. What if I move and they say I was being difficult? What if I stay and they call security anyway? Then came a vibration in his hoodie pocket. He glanced down. A single word from his mom. "Naomi Brooks' status." Isaiah didn't respond. He looked up at Hannah instead. Really looked at her. "What exactly did I do?" he asked. Her face flickered. "Just for a second." "It's just protocol," she repeated. "There was flagged behavior." "What behavior?" No answer. Just a pause. Her eyes drifted briefly toward the overhead bin where his backpack sat. That was it. No reason. Just suspicion. A gut feeling. A concern. Isaiah swallowed hard. The second flight attendant, Brent, now stood behind Hannah. His arms were crossed, blocking the aisle. Not touching, but close. "You can bring your bag," Brent said. "We'll return it before takeoff." Isaiah's heart raced. Behind him, a passenger muttered something. Always something. Someone chuckled quietly. The sound burned more than anything else. He unbuckled his seatbelt slowly, clicked it open. The sound sharpened the air. Then, with deliberate calm, he typed a single word back to his mom. "Isaiah issue." He hit send, then stood up. Not in panic, not in anger, just in truth. He reached for his bag, heavier now, not from weight but from meaning, and stepped into the aisle. The story had already been written. He just hadn't been allowed to read it. Isaiah Brooks stepped into the aisle, backpack slung over one shoulder. The fabric rubbed against the back of his neck where the collar of his hoodie had bunched up. He didn't fix it, not because he didn't feel it, but because he couldn't afford to be seen adjusting anything. Any sudden motion, any twitch, could become a story someone else told later. Behind him, row 6 had already forgotten him, or pretended to. The man who'd sipped wine avoided eye contact. The woman with the scarf was now deeply invested in the in-flight magazine. Hannah Trask didn't thank him for cooperating. Brent Connors didn't explain. They just turned and led him forward, like it had already been decided. Which, of course, it had. Isaiah walked down the narrow aisle, passing strangers whose stares grazed him like static. A few looked directly. Most pretended they didn't. The quiet was louder than words. They reached the front galley tight, metallic, too cold. The cabin door remained cracked open, a sliver of fluorescent light spilling in from the bridge outside. Through it, Isaiah caught movement, a shadow, then a figure, a man in uniform. The figure stepped onto the plane slowly. Boots, dark navy jacket, silver badge glinting under the harsh overhead lights. A police officer, tall, broad, calm, but not unfamiliar, because it wasn't just any officer. It was Jordan Brooks, Isaiah's father. Hannah froze. Brent stiffened, then quickly stepped aside. Jordan didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask permission. He walked in like he belonged, because he did. "Where's my son?" he asked. His voice was low, steady, but sharp enough to cut glass. Isaiah didn't move, didn't speak. He didn't have to. Jordan saw him and gave the smallest nod. Not a smile, not a hug, just a nod that said, "I see you. I'm here. I came." He turned toward Hannah next. "I received a message from Isaiah. What's the issue here?" The calm in his voice was unsettling, not because it was gentle, but because it was surgical, deliberate, cold enough to demand the truth. Hannah opened her mouth, then closed it again. Brent looked down at the tablet in his hands, like it might help. "We had some concerns from the crew," she began. "Just protocol." "What concerns?" Jordan asked again. "Be specific." Isaiah stood behind his father, chest tight, throat dry. He had questions too. But right now, he just needed to listen. Hannah swallowed. "He requested water. I needed to verify his age. There were irregular behaviors noted." Jordan stepped forward once. Only once. The pressure in the galley shifted like altitude. "My son is 15. He was seated. He presented ID, and he was asked to leave the cabin without explanation. He reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for a file, a printed itinerary, stamped with the school seal, laminated, official. This contains his boarding documents, school sponsorship, emergency contact, and the robotics competition schedule." He placed it firmly on the service counter. "Now what irregular behavior warranted your response?" No one answered. The silence bloomed and wrapped around them like fog. Jordan took one slow breath. "If you cannot answer that question clearly, then I will file a bias report through the Department of Aviation Safety. I will also request a formal review of crew behavior logs for Flight 803. Including all communication from boarding through pushback." Hannah looked away. Brent took a half step back, disappearing behind the curtain. Isaiah felt something shift. Not the plane, not the passengers. Him, inside him, quiet, but seismic. Because his father hadn't yelled. He hadn't threatened. He hadn't even explained. He had just stood there. Tall, black, in uniform, unapologetic, and suddenly, everything changed. Hannah's hands trembled slightly. "We didn't mean any harm." she whispered. "We were just being cautious." "Caution," Jordan replied. "Looks a lot like profiling when applied selectively." His words didn't rise, but they landed. Isaiah could breathe again, not because it was over, but because the lie had been exposed. No chaos, no shouting, just undeniable truth. He stepped forward and stood beside his father. "Can I go back to my seat now?" Jordan looked at Hannah one final time. "Is there any reason he shouldn't?" She shook her head. "None." Isaiah turned and walked back down the aisle, each step heavier than it looked, not with fear, but with knowing. He didn't look back. Isaiah Brooks returned to row 6, sliding quietly back into seat A, the window seat. The water cup was still there, untouched. The condensation had dried, the plastic lid now slightly askew, foggy on the inside, like it had exhaled something it couldn't hold in any longer. He didn't touch it. He didn't even look at it for long. But it looked at him. The aisle was empty again. The plane was sealed, cabin lights soft. Flight 803 preparing to push back from the gate like none of it had happened. Like no one had been pulled out of their seat. Like no accusations had been made. Like no father had walked in wearing a badge that shifted the air. The new attendant, one Isaiah hadn't seen before, passed by slowly. She didn't stop at his row, didn't offer him anything. No smile, no blanket, no second cup of water. That was fine. Isaiah didn't want anything. Not from them. He sat still, his bag tucked under the seat, his hands on his lap, his breath shallow, measured. Inside him, a weight settled, not fear anymore, not confusion, something else. The knowing, the kind of knowing that rewrites the way you see the world, and the way you see yourself inside it. He pulled out the laminated itinerary his father had handed him, unfolded it gently, traced the school logo at the top with one finger. North Bay Tech Academy. The blue and silver emblem was sharp, clean. A teacher had called him our rising star. His principal wrote, "Make us proud. Isaiah." He hadn't cried when Hannah made him show ID for water. He hadn't cried when they asked him to step off the plane. But now, his throat ached. His chest hurt not with panic, but pressure. Because it wasn't just what they did. It was what they assumed. That he didn't belong. That he needed verifying. That someone like him, in a seat like that, must have a story to explain. He folded the paper slowly and placed it back into his hoodie pocket. The seat beside him remained empty. The man who had muttered, "Always something," was now reading a magazine as if he hadn't said a word. As if he hadn't chuckled when Isaiah was led down the aisle like a disruption. Isaiah wanted to ask him something. Wanted to turn and say, "You think that was normal?" But he didn't, because he already knew the answer. He had seen it in the man's smirk. The comfort of knowing it would never happen to him. The woman in 6C now looked away from the window for the first time. Their eyes met briefly. She didn't smile, didn't nod, just shifted her purse and turned back around. Isaiah took a deep breath, then reached into his bag and pulled out his notebook. Not the laptop, not the project slides. The notebook with sketches, diagrams, margins filled with ideas and little reminders. He flipped past the technical pages, past the blueprint for his Bellbot, past the test data, and landed on a blank sheet. He clicked his pen. At the top, he wrote, "Seat 6A, Flight 803. They tried to shrink me. I stayed anyway." Then he began to write. Not a rant, not a complaint, just the facts. What was said, what was not said, what happened, what it meant. A quiet record, truth with no apology. His fingers trembled slightly. Not from fear, from clarity. He wasn't documenting to prove anything. He was documenting because silence is a thief, and he refused to be robbed. A line formed. Next flight attendant asked for ID before giving me water. Another removed from seat with no clear reason. Then my father arrived in uniform. The tone shifted. He stopped at that one, let his pen rest on the paper. It said everything, and not enough all at once. Why had it taken a badge? Why did it take that? He didn't underline the sentence, didn't cross it out, just stared at it. Felt the heaviness of that truth nest in his chest. The plane was in motion now, taxiing toward the runway. The gentle hum of acceleration beneath their feet. People adjusted neck pillows, pulled out headphones, returned to their movies and crossword puzzles. Life resumed, as if nothing had broken. But Isaiah had felt it, the fracture, the moment trust split at the seam, and no one even noticed the sound. His phone buzzed again. Another message from his mom. "Are you okay?" He didn't type back immediately. Instead, he stared at the water cup one last time. Still half full, still untouched, still speaking volumes. The wheels lifted off the ground. There was a faint shudder as Flight 803 broke contact with the runway, then a low exhale of jet engines pulling them into the air. Isaiah Brooks sat perfectly still. He didn't glance out the window. Not yet, because outside might be peaceful, but inside he was still climbing through something much heavier than altitude. The man next to him, Seat 6B, had finally put on headphones. Soft jazz leaked out, barely audible. He hadn't said a word since Isaiah returned, hadn't acknowledged him. Isaiah wasn't surprised. Most people didn't know what to say when the harm was subtle, when the violence wasn't loud, but polite, professional, quiet. That kind of harm didn't echo. It settled, inside the bones, behind the eyes. Isaiah adjusted his hoodie slightly, his hands still cold, his chest still tight, not like earlier. This wasn't fear. It was something slower, something heavier. The ache of knowing no apology was coming, because nobody thought one was needed. He reached for his notebook again, the page from earlier still open, the line still there. My father arrived in uniform. The tone shifted. He stared at those words. So simple, so telling. Isaiah thought about his dad's face, how he didn't blink, didn't raise his voice, didn't ask for permission to speak. He just stood tall, black, unapologetic, commanding without a single threat. And yet Isaiah's mind kept circling the same question. Would they have listened if Dad came in sweats? If Jordan Brooks had been just another tired father instead of a lieutenant with a badge and the legal language to push back, would anyone have looked twice? Would Hannah have said protocol with that same flimsy tone? Or would she have said nothing at all? The thought pierced Isaiah more deeply than anything else, because he already knew the answer. He'd known it before his dad walked in. He'd known it the moment Hannah asked for his ID for a glass of water. That ID hadn't verified his age. It had verified her assumptions. He placed the notebook aside and leaned back. Let his head rest against the seat. A little girl a few rows back giggled suddenly, some sweet sound only kids made at 30,000 feet, when everything still felt like adventure. Isaiah listened for a moment. Wished he could feel that again. He remembered when flying used to be exciting. Back when he was 10, and he and Mom flew to Chicago for a museum competition. She let him pick the window seat. He wore a tie, thinking it made him look academic. The flight attendant had given him extra cookies. He'd felt seen, welcomed, human. That version of flying felt far away now. Now he didn't feel like a kid. He felt like a problem someone decided to solve. Without saying a word, he turned slowly and lifted the window shade. The world outside was dark blue. tinged with gold near the horizon. Stars scattered overhead like someone had poked holes in a velvet curtain. It was beautiful. It was distant. Isaiah sighed softly, a quiet breath, barely audible. His body was tired, but not from traveling. It was the kind of tired that came from holding yourself in too tightly for too long, making yourself smaller, quieter, more acceptable, so they wouldn't fear you, so they wouldn't misread you, so they wouldn't decide you were something worth whispering about. His phone buzzed again. He flipped it over. A new message from Mom. "Let us know when you land. Your father said you handled everything like a grown man. I'm proud of you." Isaiah stared at the screen. His eyes burned, not tears, just the exhaustion behind the restraint. He typed back slowly, still in the air. "I'm okay. Just tired. Tell Dad thanks." Then paused. Deleted the word okay. Replaced it with still processing. Hit send. He set the phone down and turned back toward the window. His reflection stared back faintly in the dark glass. And suddenly he saw it. Not just a kid, not just a competitor, but someone who had survived something no one else in that cabin even seemed to notice. They had all moved on. Hannah, Brent, the other passengers. Their world snapped back to normal the moment he stepped into the aisle. But Isaiah couldn't. Because once you see the truth, you don't unsee it. You carry it, like carry on, except it doesn't fit in the overhead bin. It lives in your skin. The hum of the cabin had dulled to a hush. Not silence, just soft background noise. Engines. A few pages turning. Someone sneezing 2 rows up. The faint clink of a spoon and coffee somewhere behind him. But to Isaiah Brooks, it sounded like water. Still water. Heavy. Unmoving. A weight pressing on everything. He looked down at his tray table. The cup was still there. Half full. Still untouched. A symbol now. More than water. It had become a line. A line between who he was before he boarded and who he was now. He reached for his notebook again. Not out of impulse, out of necessity, because the ache in his chest had turned into words, and words needed space. He flipped to a clean page. At the top, he wrote, "What I wanted from this flight." He paused, let the pen hover, then began to write, one line at a time. Peace, sleep. To be left alone, to be seen only as a student, to feel safe. His pen slowed on that last one. Safe. It was such a simple word, but now it felt complicated. What did safety even look like when the danger wasn't a weapon, but a whisper, a glance, a decision, a choice to make you feel like you didn't belong? He circled the word, not hard, not angry, just so he wouldn't forget. Isaiah shifted in his seat. His legs cramped. His back ached. Not from the seat, from how long he'd been holding tension in his body. He let out a slow breath and stretched his fingers, then turned to a new page. This one he titled, "What They Didn't Say," and below that, he wrote, "No one said, 'You're not welcome,' but they made me feel that way. No one shouted, but they whispered about me. No one accused me of anything, but they asked me to prove everything." He stopped, leaned back, closed his eyes briefly, then sat up straighter and wrote again. "I didn't cry, because there wasn't room to cry. There was only room to behave, to shrink, to comply, to protect myself from becoming the next story." He pressed his lips together. His jaw clenched, but his hand kept moving. Because now, writing was how he resisted. Not loud, not violent, but powerful. He flipped again. This time he wrote nothing at the top. Just a list. A pure list. Everything that happened. One line each. Boarded flight on time. Sat in assigned seat. Flight attendant stared, then whispered. Asked for ID for water. Pulled from seat for verification. Father arrived in uniform. Tone changed. He underlined that last one. Then slowly, carefully, he added, they didn't see me. Not until they saw him. That truth felt bigger than the cabin. It filled every crack in the air around him. No one had apologized. No one had said, we were wrong, because they didn't think they were. They thought they were doing their job, or they thought they were keeping someone safe. But who not him? He flipped to the last page of the notebook. The very back, where the paper was slightly curled, where his fingers had traced years of sketches, plans, dreams. Now, here, he would leave a mark. He wrote, I will not be erased. I will not be rewritten by someone else's fear. I will remember, and I will remind. Then he underlined the last line once, twice. The plane jolted slightly as it hit a patch of air. Isaiah didn't flinch. He was bracing for things far rougher than turbulence. A flight attendant, not Hannah. A new one passed his row again. She paused, then placed a small pack of pretzels on his tray. No words, no eye contact, just the gesture. Then she moved on. Isaiah stared at the pretzels, not hungry, not interested. But still, they were different from the water. The water had asked for ID. This asked for nothing. He didn't smile, but he didn't ignore it either. He picked up the pack, placed it next to the notebook, and tapped his pen softly once on the tray. Then closed the notebook gently. And just like that, the act of documenting felt like breathing. Not a task, a right. He looked out the window again. The stars were still scattered, still indifferent. But this time, they felt less lonely. Because now, Isaiah had written something that mattered, something no one else could take from him. The cabin air felt colder now, not from the altitude, but from the space between people, that invisible stretch where acknowledgement should live, but often doesn't, where kindness might rest, but too often floats away, silent and afraid. Isaiah Brooks sat still in seat 6C. The notebook was closed. The pen rested beside the pretzel packet. He hadn't moved in several minutes. But inside, he wasn't still at all. His thoughts ran like lines of code. If-then statements. If I stand, then someone might look again. If I speak, then someone might listen, or might not. If I breathe wrong, then what story will they write next? And yet, beneath those loops of thought, there was something else. A rising sense of clarity. A feeling that what had happened wasn't just about him, that it never had been. It was about the air, between people, what filled it, or what didn't. The way strangers turned away when they should have turned toward. The way silence had become a choice. He turned his head slightly. The man beside him, seat 6B, was still listening to music, still avoiding eye contact. But Isaiah had seen the flicker earlier, when his dad had stepped onto the plane. That man had seen everything, and now he finally leaned over. Not much, just enough to close the space. His voice was quiet. You handled that well. Isaiah blinked, didn't answer right away. The words hit something tender, not because they were wrong, but because they were late. I didn't do anything, Isaiah said, soft, even. The man nodded. Exactly. Then leaned back. That was it. Not an apology. Not a speech. Just recognition. Small. Delayed. But something. Isaiah didn't need validation. But that sentence. "You handled that well," slipped between the ribs like warmth in a cold room. And stayed there. He turned toward the aisle. A few rows back. Someone coughed. Someone else flipped a magazine page. It struck Isaiah all at once. This flight would be remembered by no one but him. To everyone else, it would fade into routine. Just another trip. He knew that feeling too well. The way your worst moment could be someone else's background noise. He reached for the bracelet on his wrist. The one his dad had given him before leaving the terminal. A simple black band, barely noticeable, but inside, a GPS chip. "For peace of mind," his dad had said. Isaiah had rolled his eyes back then. Now he turned the bracelet over in his hand and whispered, "Thanks, Dad, not for the tracker, but for showing up, for arriving without fear, for making silence uncomfortable for the people who created it." He glanced back at the galley curtain. No sign of Hannah. She hadn't returned. Brent either. Only the new attendant had passed through since. She hadn't said a word, but she also hadn't stared or whispered, and that was something. Sometimes, in the air between people, not being hurt was the closest thing to safety. Isaiah picked up the pretzel packet, tore it open slowly, ate one, chewed quietly. Let the salt anchor him in something real. His backpack still sat between his feet. Zipped. Secure. Inside it, Mit. Bellbot. The robot he built. The one thing that still felt like his. He reached down, unzipped the side pocket, pulled out the towel-wrapped device. It was still cool to the touch. Still perfect. A compact, jointed body of silver and matte gray. Camera lenses for eyes, sensor pads underneath, every circuit designed with intention. He cradled it gently. His shoulders loosened. Because this was proof of skill, of discipline, of patience, of who he was. When no one was looking, he didn't run tests, didn't power it on. He just looked, and for a moment, he felt okay. Not fixed, not healed, just okay. Because despite it all, he had kept building. The cabin lights flickered softly, not abruptly, just a gentle nudge. A signal. Descent had begun. The overhead chime confirmed it. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Denver. Please return to your seats, fasten your seatbelts, and ensure all tray tables are stowed." The tone was polished, calm, unbothered, just like everything else that hadn't been said. Isaiah Brooks clicked his seatbelt. It had never come off. The robot Bellbot was back in his backpack, wrapped and secured. His notebook was tucked beside it, pages still warm with his handwriting. The words he had left there. They had weight, but also lift. He could feel it now. Not pride, not peace, something else. Conviction. He leaned his head against the window. Below, the city lights began to rise into view. Little rivers of yellow, clusters of movement, flickers of streetlight. And somewhere down there a place where people lived without even knowing what it meant to sit in a seat and wonder whether you belonged in it. He exhaled slowly. This descent wasn't just about altitude. It was about landing in a world that hadn't made space for you and still showing up anyway. The stranger next to him, seat 6B, had taken out his headphones. He didn't say much, didn't need to. But when their eyes met for half a second, he offered something Isaiah hadn't seen earlier. A nod. Simple. Sincere. Late but honest. Isaiah nodded back. No grudge. Not right now. He didn't have the energy to carry anything else. A sudden shift in the engine pitch marked their altitude change. Isaiah's ears popped. He swallowed, shifted his weight, then pulled the laminated itinerary from his hoodie pocket. It was still creased, still marked with his principal's handwriting. Go make us proud. It used to feel like encouragement. Now it felt heavier. Not because he couldn't, but because he knew what it took to get this far, and what had tried to stop him before he'd even begun. He folded it neatly again, slipped it back into his backpack, then paused, zipped it slowly, intentionally, like he was sealing a chapter. The cabin air grew tighter, more people stirring, shifting, stretching their backs. The woman in 6A rubbed lotion into her hands. A man 2 rows up was already pulling his rolling bag from the overhead. Normal things. Routine. But to Isaiah, it felt surreal. How quickly people forget tension when it wasn't aimed at them. His thoughts drifted. Back to the start. The gate. The nervousness. The tight grip on his backpack. His dad's calm voice that morning. Remember, son, they'll see you before they hear you. So let them see composure. He had tried. He had done everything right. And still he'd been questioned. Still he'd been pulled. Still he'd been made to prove his presence. And yet, here he was, still seated, still breathing, still him. The plane tilted slightly. The nose dipped. More lights visible. Now highways. Red taillights stretching like veins across a dark body. He traced one with his eyes. A reminder that the world was moving forward. And so was he. His fingers brushed the notebook again. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He already knew what was inside. Truth. That truth would come with him. To the terminal. To the robotics floor. To wherever someone needed to see that he hadn't just arrived. He had endured. The seatbelt sign stayed on. The descent sharpened. Outside, clouds blurred the lights briefly, then parted again. Denver waited. So did the next part of his life. He glanced toward the front of the plane. The galley curtain remained closed. No sign of Hannah, no sign of Brent. Just another attendant quiet. Efficient preparing the cabin. No words, no apologies, no acknowledgments. And maybe that was the final insult. Or maybe it was just what he expected now. But Isaiah didn't feel small anymore. Not after writing it down. Not after surviving the moment. And certainly not after seeing his father stand in that space tall, unflinching, wearing the same uniform that people claimed was for protection, only to find it was only respected when worn by someone who looked like Jordan Brooks. Isaiah tightened the strap across his lap. The seat creaked under him. His back still ached from how long he'd sat rigid. But something inside him had softened. Not because it was over, but because he had survived it with clarity. He didn't want revenge. He didn't even want justice right now. He just wanted truth to stay visible. And maybe that was enough for this flight. The wheels hit the ground with a dull thud, then a second bounce. Then the full weight of the aircraft settled. Isaiah Brooks felt it ripple through his body. That strange moment when the sky lets you go and the earth catches you without asking. The plane slowed, brakes humming, engines reversed. The outside lights blurred into yellow streaks through the window. Seat 6C sat still. But Isaiah, he felt motion in every breath. All around him, life resumed. Voices lifted, seatbelts unclicked, cabin lights warmed to soft white. It was almost cheerful, as if none of it had happened. He didn't unbuckle right away. Instead, he sat, palms resting lightly on his thighs, breathing steady. He could hear the rustle of passengers reaching for bags, the crinkle of snack wrappers, the polite hum of life moving forward. And yet, there was a silence in him that hadn't landed yet. Someone in 6B stood and reached overhead. He moved slowly, purposefully, then paused. "Take care, kid," he said, not looking down. Isaiah glanced up, nodded once, no words. The man moved on. The aisle filled quickly. Voices layered, tangled. "Got a connecting flight. My charger fell. Was it gate C or D?" None of it felt real. Isaiah looked at his tray table. The plastic cup was still there, half full, untouched. The water was warm now. The lid still cracked. He picked it up, then paused, and left it behind. His bag was still at his feet. Strap looped over one shoe. He bent down, pulled it close, and zipped the front pocket without needing to look. Bellbot was still safe. So was his notebook. He stood. No rush. No need to prove anything anymore. One step into the aisle felt like a ceremony. Not because it hurt, but because it meant something. He moved forward. Past the row, past the curtain. No one said anything. Hannah wasn't there. Neither was Brent. The new attendant, young. Silent, nodded briefly. Didn't smile. Didn't frown. Just nodded. And somehow, that was enough. He stepped into the jet bridge. The air felt cooler, drier, less controlled. The transition between stories. Behind him, the flight, the silence, the questioning, the almost. Ahead of him, a new terminal, and a competition he had nearly been taken from. The volunteer from North Bay Tech Academy stood near the exit, a tall woman in a gold lanyard. She held a small sign, STEM Nationals, Team North Bay. Her face lit up when she spotted him. "Isaiah, right. I'm so glad you made it." He nodded. "Thanks." Her voice was friendly, unaware, unburdened by the narrative he'd just lived through 30,000 feet above her. She started talking. Something about baggage claim and schedules and shuttle buses. But Isaiah's eyes drifted toward the windows, toward the man in uniform. Just beyond them, Jordan Brooks, his father, still standing, not pacing, not smiling, just watching, silent, certain, still near. Isaiah didn't wave, didn't need to. He just nodded. His dad nodded back. That was all. And somehow, it filled the space. He turned away from the glass, shouldered his bag. The volunteer kept talking, but Isaiah's thoughts spun around a single truth. They had tried to take something from him, not just a seat, but his narrative. They had almost succeeded. But now he was walking, with his robot, with his notes, with his truth. And even if no one from that plane ever said his name again, he would not forget his own. The convention center buzzed, but not loudly. It was the kind of hum that builds from potential clipboards shuffling, teams rehearsing, wheels on rolling cases clicking across polished floors. North Bay Tech Academy had set up near the back wall, under a banner with cobalt lettering, National Youth Robotics Challenge, Denver 2025. Booth 27. That was Isaiah Brooks' space, his space. Not something given, not something borrowed, not something permitted, or earned, staked, defended. He had arrived hours ago, just as the teams were checking in. No sleep, no snacks, just stillness. He didn't speak much, didn't need to. He had Bellbot with him. His teammates, Marley and Shane, offered smiles, light conversation. But they didn't push. They knew. They had seen the text from his dad, They had heard what happened. They didn't ask for details. They didn't have to. The silence said more. Isaiah sat behind the table and powered up the display. Bellbot's LED glowed steady red. He checked its wiring, ran diagnostics, watched the little limbs twitch in a tight arc. The screen beside it looped through coded diagrams, motion mapping models, environmental sensor tests. Perfect. He had spent 4 months building this, but in just one night, he had rebuilt something else. Himself. When the judges came by, clipboard in hand, Isaiah stood, straight, centered, voice calm, palms steady. He didn't rush, didn't oversell. He explained with clarity how the robot used ultrasonic pulses to detect motion, how its algorithm adjusted dynamically, how it could be used in low-visibility rescue scenarios. He didn't bring up the plane. He didn't have to. He was proof of what it couldn't take. Excellent design, one judge said, nodding. Your data logs are very thorough. Added another. Isaiah simply nodded. Thank you. No bravado, no smile fishing, just presence. They moved on. He exhaled slowly, let his shoulders fall. Shane clapped him lightly on the back. Nailed it, bro. Isaiah gave him a nod, half a grin. He didn't feel nailed. Not exactly. But he felt seen. And that was something. Hours passed. Competitions came and went. Noise built. Awards approached. Still, Isaiah stood close to his booth. Not because he expected anything, but because he knew what it cost to be here. The ceremony began with announcements. Booths called out. Schools cheered. Then came the top 3. Third place in the National Robotics Division. A pause. A flicker of static on the speaker. North Bay Tech Academy. Bellbot by Isaiah Brooks. Applause. Claps. Whistles. Even a few surprised glances. Isaiah blinked. Third in the country. He stepped up to the stage. Calmly. Accepted the medal. The envelope. Smiled just a little. And looked out across the crowd. Not searching. Just holding space. He didn't win first. He didn't need to. Because this wasn't about a robot. It was about what you build when the world tries to dismantle you. The courtyard behind the convention center was quiet. Long shadows spilled across the pavement as the sun dipped behind Denver's skyline. A gentle wind rustled the trees. Laughter drifted faintly from a group of students still wearing competition badges. But Isaiah Brooks sat alone. Not lonely, just alone. His backpack sat at his feet. The medal was inside, tucked between his notebook and the envelope with the scholarship application form. He hadn't touched it since the stage. Hadn't looked at the judges again. Didn't need to. He wasn't thinking about placement. He was thinking about the water cup. He stared at the pavement in front of him, at a fallen leaf spinning in the breeze, its motion unpredictable, yet purposeful. Just like everything that had happened. Just like him. His fingers reached into the bag, pulled out the notebook, flipped past the pages with diagrams and technical notes. He found the page where he'd written it all down. Seat 6C, the ID check, the whisper, the call. His father's voice, every sentence still raw, still heavy but settled now, like dust after a storm. He uncapped his pen and added one more line. They tried to shrink me, but I did not disappear. He closed the notebook, pressed the cover shut. Not to hide the story, to preserve it. Behind him, a familiar voice called out, "You good." He turned. Jordan Brooks stood a few feet away, still in uniform, still steady, but now with something softer in his eyes. Isaiah gave a small nod. Yeah. Jordan walked over slowly, lowered himself onto the bench beside his son. Neither spoke for a moment. They just sat, the air between them full, not with questions, but with understanding. After a while, Jordan asked, "Did you write it down?" Isaiah nodded. "Most of it." "That's good," Jordan said quietly. "That's how you make sure it doesn't get rewritten." Isaiah looked over at his dad. "I didn't get angry. You know, not really." Jordan gave a half smile. "That's because you know what it costs." They sat there in silence again. A deeper one now, the kind built on shared memory and quiet resilience. "You did good today," Jordan added. "Not just the medal." Isaiah glanced over. Then what Jordan looked out across the concrete. "You showed up. You didn't fold. That matters." Isaiah swallowed, letting those words settle. Not praise, not performance, just truth. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out the bracelet, the one with the GPS chip. He held it in his palm, rubbed the tiny black square with his thumb. "You really think you need this on me?" Jordan didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I need to know where you are, because not everyone sees you the way I do." Isaiah nodded. He understood. It wasn't about control. It was about protection, a layer of armor you wear quietly, because the world sometimes assumes the worst before it knows your name. He slipped the bracelet back on, not as a concession, but as a choice. Jordan stood first. "Come on, let's get something to eat." Isaiah got up too, slinging his bag over his shoulder. As they walked away from the center, he looked back just once, not to dwell, but to mark it. He had stood there. He had spoken. He had stayed, not in protest, not in pride, in presence. And from now on he would carry the record. Sometimes injustice doesn't shout. It whispers. It smiles while it pushes you aside. It hides behind words like protocol and concern. But what happens when someone refuses to be erased? Isaiah Brooks didn't raise his voice. He didn't cause a scene. He sat. He wrote. He remembered. And in doing so, he built something stronger than any machine. He built a record. This wasn't just about a plane, or a water cup, or even a flight attendant's bias. It was about what it means to walk into a space that wasn't made with you in mind, and to claim your seat anyway. His story is a reminder. To every young person told to calm down, move along, or prove themselves just to be treated fairly, you don't owe the world perfection. You owe it your presence. And to those watching from the sidelines, your silence matters. So does your voice. If this story moved you, like it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And hit subscribe for more real stories that reflect the heart of our communities. Stories of injustice, resistance, and quiet strength. We'll be here, telling the truth, one story at a time.